Hello and welcome to The Natural View. I'm Maggie Jacqua. I'm the content director of WholeFoods Magazine, and I'm here with my co-host Todd Pala of 24 Stories Marketing. Hi, Todd.
Hi, Maggie. Good to see you.
Always good to see you, and great to see our special guest today. We have Shaheen Majeed. He is the global CEO and managing director of Sabinsa. Welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Shaheen. Good to see you.
Same.
Great to have you here, and some backstory for everybody on what we're doing here. This is part of our leadership special series. So in the July 2024 print and digital issue of WholeFoods Magazine, we put a spotlight on leaders in the natural products industry and really what sets these companies apart. And you can read those articles for information on Sabinsa. But today we're going to talk to Shaheen a bit more about the company and some recent developments. So let's dive in. I just want to start by saying we all recently returned from Supply Side West, and UMPA gave you and also your father, the founder of the company, some great honors. The Lifetime Achievement Award in Science and Innovation to your father, and you were awarded the Excellence in Leadership Award for business leadership, support of the industry and industry initiatives, and years of service. So congratulations on that. I was at that award ceremony and it was really special. It was great to see.
Yeah, it was great to see you.
Thank you.
Family there to support you and how you honored Dr. Majeed. I mean, it was great. The whole thing was just a good event to reflect back on the history of Sabinsa and the industry too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's not an easy show to bring your family to. Primarily, all of us are busy. We have, the trade show side. There's a lot of activities going on, but it was very meaningful and impactful for my children and my wife, who were extremely close with my father. And it was one of those recognitions that I wanted, that I wanted my children to see and to feel. And unknowingly, the room was completely full. Lauren Israelson at UNPA can do that, and this time it was full and people were standing in the back, and we were sitting in the front, so I couldn't see the full impact of it, but we had a lot of great comments and people that told us how important that was to see from father to son and even to my children down. So yeah, thank you for that.
To see the next generation. Yeah, I know there was a lot of love in the room, so it was really special. So just to talk about that a little bit more, I mean, the reasons for these awards are just the good works that the company has done over the years. So maybe you can just kind of start by telling us about Sabinsa and what sets you guys apart.
So back in the early 80s, when my father had the idea for Sabinsa, Sabinsa was incorporated in 1988, but he was thinking about a company that he would want to go and do on his own. And he was here in the United States. He came over as a pharmacist from South India, and he started working for a couple of companies, mainly, and what people may not know, he was doing tableting and even cleaning shop floors. He was doing odd end jobs to get his master's in science and finally his PhD. And then he moved on to doing, work for product development at several of the pharmaceutical companies. But he had this in mind that he would take the ultimate risk to start his own company. And he would tell me that, listen, if I failed, I'm a US educated pharmacist. I can go and be a pharmacist somewhere. So he had that risk tolerance that was pretty high, and that's quite incredible. And it carries on through, what he developed at Sabinsa. So finally in 88, we get incorporated, and he really didn't know what to sell, how to sell it, until customers started asking him for certain things. And one of those things was a bark from a tree. And ultimately, he kept questioning, why do you want to bark from a tree? And they would tell him, Majeed, I just want to crush it and put it in a capsule. We hear it's great. And so he said, how about I just find that molecule for you? And being a researcher, being a pharmacist, he could do that. And so that's ultimately one of the, small steps of what Sabinsa is. We would research, we would find out that molecule. We then started to extract that molecule and, deliver that in a format that you could use primarily in a capsule or tablet, and now used in so many different formats. But it was that research intuition that he had, finding that molecule that worked. And then, of course, as the years went on, clinically studying it and then making sure it got into publications. And so that resonated very well with our customers. And then it became a necessity for Sabinsa to do that. every single time. So any product that we thought of in any category we wanted to come out with, it was almost I would say a certainty that when Sabinsa walked into a meeting with the customer, those things were just expected. And that has become now the norm. And so those were some of our humble beginnings. Garcinia Cambogia, if you guys recall, there was an era of time for that. Weight management was a big part of Sabinsa's category. He went on to develop Colis Forskolai, branded as Forslean, Bioperin in the black pepper area. So a lot of these innovations and technologies came up, early on in Sabinsa's product list. But again, a lot of good communication with customers and trying to understand what they're really trying to deliver.
Yeah, and fast forward to just recently, you just announced a global partnership with Postbiotics. And I'm curious, in the press release, you mentioned that it's one of the first global partnerships that you've entered into. And I'm sure there's no coincidence that, here you are now, global CEO, and you have this global partnership. So give us some insight there in terms of, give us some details of the partnership and how this came about and sort of how you're thinking about this new era for Sabinsa.
So one part of the story of Sabinsa's early existence and early creation that I left out in the story was he had partners when he first started the business. And unfortunately, it did not work out. They cheated him. He had a particular technology. Again, being the scientist, he was the technology front, and the other 3 or 4 partners were the marketing and administration, finance. And they unfortunately stole it. They went, out the door. They went with that technology and left him high and dry. And then Sabinsa was started on a whole bunch of credit cards. That's how he funded Sabinsa in the early days. And I remember my mother telling me it was almost up to, I want to say, about 42 credit cards. I think that in itself is a record for anybody, but it was quite a number of, instances where you needed money to get Sabinsa going. That little story tells you that he would ultimately not do a partnership later on because your experiences define you, however you travel through life. And till the very end, we have been kept private as a company. He may have dabbled with some investors to find out where he sits and where he ranks as a company, and he was satisfied with those numbers, but he never relinquished control of the organization. And so it was a stark comparison to what I ended up doing, because I used to talk to him about these kinds of partnerships, and his reluctance was based on his original experience, his early on experience. But at the same time, he knew the next generation coming, maybe hearing me talk about it, maybe hearing the possibility of something that could be done. He didn't fully outright stop me, but at the same time, of course, he was the final person who had the say in the organization, so he didn't execute it. Along comes a time after his passing, about a month later, we have this opportunity that's presented to me. And I look at it and I find the technology incredible. I find that it's something that Sabinsa knows about, postbiotics. Sabinsa has a postbiotic, and we've only done it as a topical. And in our research pipeline, we never looked at it as an ingestible. And from this company, they have done a tremendous amount of research, and they have a wealth of knowledge on the ingestible postbiotics. And I said, you know what? This makes sense. We're not 2 foreign companies talking to each other. We're not, a company that doesn't understand the science, and I'm just trying to distribute an ingredient. I ended up understanding it so much so that it complements some of the other ingredients Sabinsa has, and they appreciated that as well. So speaking the same lingo, having this ideology of bringing a product that is so beneficial to consumers, because we have the reach. Sabinsa has the network of sales that can reach out there. And I had to step back and, 30,000 feet from the air and look down and say, wow, Sabinsa's in Japan and in Europe and in China and parts of US and South America. Why can't we get this incredible ingredient everywhere? And the company in Florida agreed with my comments and statements, and we found a real good synergy between Sabinsa and postbiotics to come together. But yeah, it was a lot of debate internally many, many years ago with Dr. Majeed, and it may not have happened with Dr. Majeed even today. But I think he knew the inevitability of a partnership in some way, form, or fashion. And I'm really happy that I was able to do this.
Nice. So exciting things to come on that horizon. And I just wanted to kind of go back to what you were saying, like you guys are so innovative. And of course, when you're innovative and you're kind of winning, there might be people who are trying to, get their claws into some of that success. And I know we recently shared the news that you were just elected as, let me read it here, Vice Chairman of the Confederation of the Indian Industry National Committee on Intellectual Property Rights. So that's kind of another, protecting that property. What are some of the goals and initiatives there?
Well, let me begin by saying that, Sabinsa invested quite a bit into the intellectual property space. So if you look at our branded ingredients, we branded them. We took initiative to make sure that these names reached far beyond our B2B business, but could be understood by even consumers. And that was an early innovative process that my father, Dr. Majeed, brought to Sabinsa. And you can see that now as a ripple effect to our competitors, new entrants into the marketplace. People want branded ingredients. And so to protect those branded ingredients, you provide science behind them. To protect those science, you do clinical trials and you take patents and, you put these trademarks. And so we've now garnered over 500 patents worldwide. We have thousands of trademarks, hundreds of copyrights. And that's a unique side of Sabinsa people may not know. They get caught up in, hey, what clinical trial have you done on your probiotic and things like that. But this side of the intellectual property is so important because we see it as a protective measure for delivering our ingredients to our customers, so that if a generic version comes out or if somebody infringes on this technology, that it's, from Sabinsa, it's right, it's safe, and it's not toxic. We've done all the work for it. And so the consumers are not affected adversely, right? There's no adverse effect to them. And we only see that as doing right by intellectual property. And so when the Confederation of Indian Industries approached our organization back in India, they wanted a speaker that could compellingly put the statement out there that says intellectual property is important, and especially for India, where there are, thousands, millions of companies that are, very innovative, and they're struggling with trying not to be generic, not to be a commodity, but how do they protect their rights? They may or may not know how to do that. And so they wanted a company like Sabinsa and a speaker like myself to come out and put forth some ideas and stand up for the industry, stand up for IP protection, et cetera, et cetera. And if you look at between the United States and China, India doesn't rank up so high. And so this was important that they have somebody that is from a different industry, not from software, not from the biotech and, strict pharmaceutical side, to talk about another industry that values IP. And I guess that's where they saw a great fit for Sabinsa and for me.
Oh, that's great. And changing gears just a little bit here, I think a lot of people in the industry already know that the Sami-Sabinsa Group does a ton of good in terms of, for the industry, but also for people and the planet. You have a lot of initiatives there. And I'm just wondering if you want to pick a couple of those that are close to your heart and just talk a little bit about them. What they do, why you do that type of work, why it's important to you, to the industry.
I think, there are several stories, and thank you for that question. It's a real heartwarming question when I think about it, because, like I said, there are so many instances, and there's one I'd really like to pick, because if you knew the time and the place where I was, where my father was, it becomes almost surreal. And this was, I would say, around 2008, 2009. We're having issues with our agriculture, with delivering products, because there were floods in the south, droughts in the north of India. And of course, that's exactly when customers were demanding your product, right? That's exactly when they need the most amount, and we just couldn't do it. And so we spent a lot of time on the fields just to understand how farmers viewed this and how they would overcome these challenges, what they did when they had droughts and when they had floods, and how they moved about it, and how the farming community moved around it. Because let's not forget, India is trying to feed itself. There's a necessity for the crops to be developed. They also are, servants to Mother Nature, but they figured it out. And we, as a private company, we didn't do our due diligence in that. And so it was important for us to be on the ground and figure that out. And I remember one time there was a lady, she was over 90 years old, and she owned several hundred acres of land. And she comes up and she speaks her native language, which we did not in that particular state. And so we had a translator, and she was basically saying, listen, I will give you my land if you employ my 3 children. She knew her time was coming soon. She wanted her 3 children to carry on the land, but make sure that someone used the land wisely and appropriately for agriculture, to feed the village, to feed, the community. But at the same time, she was a business lady. She knew as a private company that there's some monetary gain here. And she was willing to sign the contract. And this was a very unusual experience because you normally don't get that. We deal directly, very seldom, with farmers. We deal mostly with the brokers and even politicians of the village. It's a little different than maybe America, or other parts of the world. But you can, straight away see a minister or a politician come up and say, hey, listen, I have thousands of acres. This is what you're going to do. This is what we can provide, etc. Here we are dealing with the 90-plus-year-old woman, and she wants to insure her children. So that one little piece of story will tell you how endearing my father was to that process. And he made sure that everyone on board at the Sabinsa agricultural team knew that and went in wholeheartedly, wanting to develop communities like this and helping people like her and her children. And we have so many other stories, from building the plants in certain villages to even shutting down plants because there are certain parts of India where they were allocated as commercial, and then they became residential because people moved in. But Sabinsa has a factory there, and suddenly there's a noise complaint, and we have to get out. And sometimes it's difficult because we employ those same people that live in that community. And if we shut down and we leave, we have hundreds to thousands of jobs that are being pulled off. And so we have to be very delicate in that situation as well. So we look at what the community impact will be, no matter what time, where, how. And so we answer those questions routinely now before we make that step forward. But that all is because of what Dr. Majeed did in the past and how pure he was in his heart to make sure that, everybody gets something back for giving into this world.
It's beautiful. And I also remember reporting for a feature we did in 2020 around COVID and just spotlighting all the work, the sense of, we were talking about, how companies were supporting their teams, but also beyond that. And I'll have to link to it where we have this post, but seeing everything that Sabinsa did was really, really wonderful. So
yeah, COVID was absolutely challenging. And in many ways, I think the world is learning that the after effects, like the aftertaste of a bad drink, still lingers on quite harshly. And we're learning. We don't have all the right answers. We did what we thought at that time was the best for our employees, and what Dr. Majeed felt at that time was all hands on deck. We will continue to work at the safest possible levels, at the safest possible environments, so that the customers could receive their product. And we knew that those ingredients that we produced will ultimately get to a consumer who was facing challenges with COVID or beyond, and we couldn't let that up. And so kudos to Dr. Majeed for doing that. It was an unbelievable effort. And I'd just like to say, it wasn't just Dr. Majeed. There were other industries and other companies in our industry that also were all hands on deck. So kudos to them as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So shifting gears a little bit from that, we wanted to talk about something that we looked at in the leadership series, which is just the importance of mentorship. So I'm wondering if you can touch on that and how you've seen efforts at Sabinsa pay off.
Well, I couldn't begin this response without telling you and the audience about my own mentorship growing up in this company. My father, as Dr. Majeed, can be a very dominating individual. And you would think there's a lot to learn from Dr. Majeed. And while there is, it's also very difficult at the same time being a son, also being an employee, wanting to grow up in the business. Sometimes him mentoring me doesn't really go hand in hand. And I say that in the most loving, sweet way. And he knew that as well. And what he did to overcome that was assigned me to work with other great people that he hired. One of them being Todd Norton, who's also in the industry. He was with Sabinsa for many years. The humility and just being humble at the workplace and, you know, getting the job done. That was amazing what I learned from Todd. We had Dr. Vladimir, who was incredible in terms of science and education. He never, even if I told a crazy idea, he would never say, that's a crazy idea. You probably shouldn't be thinking that way. He would always inspire more creativity on your ideas. Imagine just those two, right? I mean, as someone growing up in the industry, and no matter what age you are, boy, that really sends you in the right direction of career growth and, you know, how best to take your path forward. And then you ultimately give that to the next set of people that you meet. So when I deal with our scientists back in India or here in the US, there is no crazy idea. How do we develop it further? And I don't think I would have been able to do that. I don't see myself doing that in a mentorship way. Maybe it comes off as that, but I certainly I felt I was mentored that way to give off a creative approach. I find great satisfaction in being humble about who I am and where I'm at and the position I hold now. And I don't think that I would have had that if I didn't learn that early on. So that's just me. And we have a set of individuals at this organization that are great at fostering more creative development around the people that they work with. So people like Asha Ramesh, who's our CEO here in Sabinsa, USA, 30 plus years with us. We have Madhu Subramaniam, who was my father's right hand, not only for finance, but a lot of the administration, also 30 plus years. And these people have been able to teach those coming up with them, those working in their departments. And I absolutely encourage that. And that was great. And my father kind of sat back and allowed that to happen. So I thought that was incredible.
Yeah, that's a wise approach. Because as all three of us are parents here, you're always questioning which part, when are you going to jump in and give advice or correct or whatever, and when are you going to let your son or daughter go off and experience that lesson on his or her own. So it's really interesting that he would allow you to make those connections within the company and grow in that way. So you're not just like one dimensional thinking of the way he would do it, but other people. I mean, what a great approach. Speaking of, in the industry, as the industry grows, we have all these new people coming in constantly. And I always think about our industry and the friendships we have and the partnerships we have. And there's a special bond. It feels like no other industry I've ever been part of. So I'm wondering, as you think about that, new people entering the industry, how do you think about, maybe it's not mentoring, but maybe it's influencing some of these new people that come to the industry to make sure that the threads of what was built along the way and how we all communally operate together and relate to each other, how do you keep that going from a leadership standpoint? What advice could you give to those folks?
So I'll give you a very, very raw example. I was having dinner with Lauren Israelson the other night, and I said to him, "Hey, Lauren, I've been on a few panel discussions with you. Some of those presentations, can you pull it out? Because I'd like to show my son." Now, my oldest son, Ramsey, he's just started working at Sabinsa, gives a few hours a day, a few hours a week, basically, still in high school. And I just thought it would be incredible if he knew the history. He doesn't have to learn it. I'm not going to test him. And just to hear that, I think it's one simple way, even for a new entrant, right? Like, even if it's someone who's not my son who would come in, I would love for them to hear somebody like Lauren speaking, somebody like Mark Blumenthal, see what the industry news, what's going on, how did this happen, how did this come about? What is this animosity we go back and forth with FDA on, right? Like, let's try to figure that out and let the next generation have their own ideas on how to handle this rather than us, trying to topple on our feelings, right? And there's a lot going on politically. So, how has that been evolving over the number of years now for the next number of years, right? So I think a large part of that is history. History is very important. I always kind of questioned also, why did we ever take history classes growing up in, middle school and high school? There's a reason to that. If you know your history going for your present and to your future, you could probably avoid some of those mistakes or make something better down the road. And I truly believe that now. Seeing my son here, I go, well, does he know why we do this a certain way? And if he's not my son, if it's somebody else, do they know why we're doing this a certain way? And knowing how social media has been a huge influence, how friends are a huge influence, how other industry, people who come from other industries into our industry, they have a great influence as well because they think different. They have seen things different. How do we accumulate that? How do we respect that and transpire that to make it a better place for us going forward? So yeah, I'm totally about respecting history, learning as much as we can from it, and then taking it forward. That's how I see for the new people coming in what best they could evolve into.
I love that. And it kind of, the next thing I was going to ask you is just about what you think the people in the industry can do to kind of collectively foster our success. And I think you hit on some great ways there in terms of educating and mentoring and really fostering the next generation while also listening to them and learning from them. So I think that's great. And I highly recommend all that. Any other gems of wisdom you want to throw out?
Well, I'll give you another raw example. So the last 2 days, I took my backpack and I'm here in Utah. So I went around seeing a few customers and fantastic time. I had a regional salesperson come up with me and I'm not a great salesperson, but I guess over time I have these stories that I developed. And so whether we were sitting with an R&D person or a purchasing director, and ultimately, it comes down to maybe price, and they say, yeah, you guys are not where we want it to be, or hey, we're looking for this particular clinical study, and you have this, but we don't have that, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not too worried about those things. I go back and I go, hey, did you know, kind of thing, and I start a story about, did you know about this, and yeah, we were doing this back in the days, and that's why we ended up doing this, and this thing, maybe currently what's happening with turmeric, for example, and the supply situation. And I would ask, did they tell you about corn? And they would go, what are you talking about corn and turmeric for? And I would tell them, well, the farmers were expecting a certain price and they weren't getting it. So now they've turned to making corn, because corn, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, they get a return of 2 items, the stock and maize. And so why would turmeric farmers now look at turmeric? They can look for corn as a source of income. And this starts to make a different mindset for people. This starts to create a lot more conversation other than what's your price per kilo? Wait, there's something really going on here. And so I try to introduce these kinds of other facets, other stories or other knowledge that our customers may not directly get if you're just trying to sell, one-to-one or a price conversation. And so yeah, the idea of stories, the impact that you have from the knowledge, it's okay to listen to us once in a while. I at least for myself, as I travel to the different Sabinsas, what I try to do is I pick up on these regional stories, what's going on in China, what's going on in Japan, what's happening in Korea right now, with the martial law and all those things. How does it affect, what should our customers be worried about, et cetera, et cetera. And I try to share that input as I go out there and meet customers. And you could see a real impact. And I'm not talking impact at the, that Sabinsa got business because Shaheen, shared a story, but they will know to come back to Sabinsa because they go, well, if something's going on, let's reach out to Sabinsa. And I hope in saying this, that more of our competitors and companies that deliver ingredients know more of their landscape, and that it's just not about the ingredient that they're trying to sell, but there's so much more that we can share. And so I hope that's attainable to everyone.
Yeah, great. All right, let's look ahead to 2025. Let's talk a little bit about some bright spots you might see for Sabinsa or for the industry in general. What do you have in way of future predictions here, Shaheen?
Future predictions. So I'm going to leave politics aside, and I'm going to say, at least from Sabinsa's point of view, we are gearing up it's our 8.5 facility. We have our 8th facility that's in 2 parts, Unit 1 and Unit 2. And Unit 2 is going to come live probably by the second quarter of next year. And this is a high volume production capacity for botanical extracts. So we're really excited about that because we know from what we're hearing in the marketplace about we want more supply, we need more material. Sabinsa is going to be able to answer that question come next year in a much better and bigger way. We have more partnerships that we're engaged in, more conversations about other ingredients that are great, but great in science, but they're just not able to reach the consumers. Sabinsa wants to be able to step in and help do that for them. We have so we covered the part about new technologies. We covered the part about new extractions. What about people? So one of the biggest things that when I came back was to put structure into the organization. And maybe in some of the other conversations or some of the other podcasts that I've done, I've talked about how a company was run chaotically, and Sabinsa could only be run chaotically by Dr. Majeed. Only he could do what he did. And coming into this new era, I myself like to run this structurally. And so my sister and I, Dr. Anju Majeed, also see it in the same way. Her being in India, creating great structure there. I myself seeing the other Sabinsas worldwide. We're putting people in their designated roles and empowering them to make the decisions. You know, I have a lot of respect for the people that have come up with us. We have a list of people that are 30 plus. We have a list of people that are 20 plus, 10 plus. And I look through it and I go, look at the leaders here. You know, what more can they do for us? And so sometimes in a chaotic environment, you don't see their movement as much as you should. You see other movement because you created that chaos. And that's great. It worked for someone. When I'm in a structural role, I see leadership and I go, this person can do more for us. And I'm fascinated by that. So we got the extraction, we got new technologies, and we got more of our employees being empowered. So I look forward to that.
All right. Sounds like just amazing things on the horizon. We know that you guys will keep us informed, and we'll keep sharing the news on WholeFoodsMagazine.com and in the print issue. Any final words you want to leave us with?
Well, I think we are at an incredible time in our industry. I think we are in an incredible time for consumer healthcare. And I see the convergence of this being great for our industry. And I want people to be very positive about that. I want to reassure people that there are great companies abound and with great products and great ingredients. We keep up the safety, keep up the clinical trials, and let's all be very inclusive about everyone that we want to help and provide for. So with that, I thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us.